The following program is brought to you free of charge by the sponsorship of Novus Ordo Watch. See for yourself that the Church of the Second Vatican Council is not in fact the Catholic Church of the ages. Go to novusordowatch.org.
The following is sponsored by our YouTube members in the Immaculate Heart of Mary Guild tier level. This program, along with all the rest, are made possible by our members like J. Luis and Michael J., who enable us to produce truly Catholic content, as well as supporting the clergy who are vital to our work. We sincerely thank them for their support and would like to ask you to please remember them in your prayers.
Hello and welcome to Pastoralia on the Restoration Radio Network. I'm Stephen Heiner, and with me as always is Father Stephen McKenna. Father, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get started, Father, would you like to lead us in a prayer?
Sure, absolutely. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother
of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Amen. Saint Isidore, Bishop and Doctor of the Church,
pray for us.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.
Thank you for that, Father. Pastoralia is, as always, a show that seeks to deal with questions that may not be dealt with in a sermon or in a catechism class, but maybe you'd be able to ask Father if you caught him at Coffee and Donuts on Sunday if he wasn't busy talking to everyone else as well. So here we have Father captive as an audience for you. As usual, Father, we are going to start our show by picking up the leftovers of the past show, and that's to talk about stuff that we can do on a Sunday or things that are permitted on a Sunday. And someone had followed up with the question, Father, should we go out to eat on Sundays to support businesses that are working on the Sabbath? Are we then indirectly causing people to work on Sunday because we're supporting businesses? Those businesses only stay open because they can get customers, not quite a boycott situation, but is that okay? Can we go out to eat on Sundays, Father?
To go out to eat is always okay on a Sunday because, well, first off is that when we see them working on a Sunday, they're preparing a meal that you have to eat. I mean, that's that's one of the general principles of life is that you have to eat, and especially on a Sunday. And to go out for a bite to eat on a Sunday is fine because whether you show up there or not is not going to change whether those people work on Sunday or not. So your participation in it is something that is very remote. In addition to that, if you didn't go out to eat, you'd still end up having to cook anyway. So somebody is going to the work that's being done is something that is going to have to be done either by you or by somebody else. And them preparing a meal and doing the dishes and everything like that is perfectly, that's something that you would be able to do on a Sunday. And so therefore when other people are doing it for you at a restaurant, it's a nice treat for Sunday, especially if you have a bunch of family members and, you don't necessarily want to, destroy your house by preparing this monster meal, but you can keep everybody together. Yeah, you can keep everybody together for a nice meal or something. It's, to go out to eat, that is, I know that long ago there weren't many options that were open on a Sunday, but now that they are, it's, we can certainly do so. But there, at times there were restaurants even before the council that would be open, and Catholics could partake of going out for a meal. So nobody should have any worries about going to a restaurant. It's really more taking care of unnecessary things. So, on a Sunday, if you, for instance, if you were out of milk, you could run to the store and grab a gallon of milk because you needed it for that Sunday's meal. But if you had an opportunity to do, you don't go out and do your whole giant bulk shopping on a Sunday, the big giant grocery shop, because that could be done at any other time during the week. It's more of, only out of necessity do you go and shop. But so we should really have that spirit of the law more than the letter of the law mentality towards those things. We need to, you have to eat, and the restaurant is able to provide you with that food. So don't feel bad about going out and eating at a restaurant on a Sunday.
And I suppose we just have to put that in the context of a gas station. Nobody really ever questions whether you should, are you okay to get gas on a Sunday? Sometimes people drive such a long distance, they use up a full tank of gas, and no one's asking you to carry an extra tank of gas in your trunk, on Saturday that you filled up, so you don't do commerce. So obviously there's as I think you say, Father, some balance there. Although if you do have a home that's big enough to host your family, or if you've had enough, I think, Father, over by St. Gertrude's, there's that pancake house that has that ridiculous, huge old Dutch pancake that takes like 20 minutes to make. It's like this big apple. Not that I'm dreaming of it or anything, but after Lent, one might want something like that. So it's good.
Right.
Good. Thank you for the clarity. Now, someone had followed up with a canon law question. Is there a canon that provides for us actually doing literal work, be it intellectual work or manual labor on Sunday? Is there any exception to that? There was a question.
There is exception to it, and that is an exception of necessity. So, when we think of the example of our Lord, healing on the Sabbath day, and then the Jews, they attacked him for healing the man on a Sabbath day, and he asked those same Pharisees, which one of you, if you had an ass that fell into a ditch, would not pull him out on the Sabbath day? I mean, if there's a legitimate necessity, then there's exception to the rule. Once again, it's that spirit of the law. So, generally speaking, we're not allowed to do manual labor. But, if you were an essential, you have an essential occupation, for instance. So if you were a police officer and you could, they have rotating shifts or something, well, the population, crime doesn't take a break on Sunday. So they need police on a Sunday to be working, and if it's your turn to take that shift, then that's what it is. And also, if you couldn't get a Sunday off because it'd be, it's extreme hardship to you to get off on the Sunday, and it would do harm to your career because maybe you could even possibly get fired for refusing to work on a Sunday, then that's kind of an exception to the rule too. Now, we shouldn't be making excuses. Don't just say, well, I was asked to work on Sunday, so I'll just do it, when you could legitimately get out of it. But at the same time, if there's no way out of working on a Sunday and you have to, then that's something that may be done. And in those situations, in keeping with that same idea, the spirit of the law, we should also realize that, first off, once again, we have to remember that we still have to keep that day holy. So we should be doing prayers, and we should be reading, and we should, be doing spiritual things to the best of our ability. And that we also shouldn't be just looking for opportunities to work. And we should try to make up, if we can't make it to Mass on a Sunday because of a necessity, then we should try to come on a different day to at least, be able to attend Mass, just to say to God, all right, I wasn't able to fulfill my Sunday obligation because of a real necessity, but I'm here on, Tuesday because I don't have to work this day, and at least I'm going to honor you in that way. So it's, it's one of those things that we have to use kind of our Catholic sense, if you will, our Catholic common sense in that way. We still want to give all we can to God, and usually, generally speaking, that means for most people that they should be able to treat Sunday as a proper day of rest and as a Sunday. As for manual labor, say around the house or something, or projects or whatever that need to be done, then it's more of a, I guess in that way, a subjective type of situation. If it's a true necessity that has to be done on a certain day and can't be done otherwise, then you'd be allowed. But I would ask people to talk to their priest. Ask their priest, I have this. I can't do it another time. Can I do it today? And that way we're not being our own judge towards it. We're not trying to we don't slip into making excuses for ourselves, but at the same time, so we're making sure that it's something we actually have to do, and we can go forward with good conscience in that way, knowing that, okay, I'm doing something and the priest said I'm allowed to do it, and I don't have any worries from there on out.
Okay. The last question we had as follow-up from last episode, Father, was about the general confession, and the meat of the question was, well, Father, it's all well and good for a general confession, but if you're a sedevacantist and there's an interregnum, what do you do for reserved sins that are reserved to an ordinary or to a delegate priest or even to the Holy Father himself? What's the discipline?
Well, in the situation that we're in now, reserved sins are obviously, that reservation is important, but if this is really where that principle of epikeia applies. The principle that if the law ceases to bind if it does harm. People need to be forgiven from their sins. That's something that the church is all. That's why confession is there. If someone falls into sin, it's an unfortunate thing, but they need to have forgiveness for that in order to save their soul. God wouldn't prevent people from saving their souls, and so the laws of the church are important, but in that way, if you fell into a reserved sin, say if it was someone had in their past life had procured an abortion, for instance, that's a reserved sin. And now they since had conversion and they feel terrible about it and they want to, they're going to confess it. Normally speaking, the priest that they're going to confession to would have to, if you will, kick it up the line, to where it's reserved. But seeing as we don't have any authority with jurisdiction to do that, we're allowed to forgive those sins, and that's. I think if there's one thing more than a lot, if there's something that points to the necessity of the priests today having really good training, not just going to any rogue priest that's out there, it's in that area of confession is one of the chief areas, because you priests now more than ever need to be really well grounded in principles of morality and moral theology and everything like that, because we have to forgive sins that normally we might not have to deal with under normal circumstances in church. So for us, we're able to forgive those sins, and someone should not hesitate to come to us to confession because they might have fallen into a reserved sin. But it's just a heavier weight of responsibility on your local your pastor's shoulders for forgiving those sins. So it's but at the same time we are free to forgive any sins that come our way in that regard, because we have to. There's nobody to appeal to. There's nobody to send them to for the reservation, and so for us, because it's for the good of souls, we are allowed to forgive those sins.
Very well. For those of you who are just joining us, you are listening to Pastoralia, Episode 3 on the Restoration Radio Network. I'm Stephen Heiner. That's Father Stephen McKenna. And we were just doing some cleanup from our last show, last episode, in which we were talking about confession. We were dealing with what you can do on a Sunday, and we were talking about general confession. And as a result, we had some questions from the audience, which is always great. And as a result, we did some cleanup work. Now we're going to enter formally into our episode now, and I want to give just a little bit. And I'm sorry, this is episode 4, not episode 3. We're going to get into the heart of our discussion today. So I do want to advise, we know we have a lot of families who have children listening. We would just urge you to keep in mind we're going to be discussing some fairly mature topics. So if you want to take a moment to excuse the children from the room, probably anyone under the age of 16, 17, 18, although any family is free to make their own discretionary judgments, but we'll be talking about some pretty sensitive topics today. And Father, those sensitive topics involve who you live with, who you work with, who you meet on a daily basis. And one of the things that I've learned during my time here in Europe is just how much the divisions of old from Christendom still persevere, even to an atheistic and non-Christian society. There's still this notion of us. So, 90% something, France is nominally Catholic, but less than, it's single digits that actually practice. But there's still the sense of us and them, even manifesting in a huge demonstration against marriage, quote unquote, marriage equality some time back. In America, that's never been the case. We've always been a nation of others altogether. So we had the Spanish colonize America, we had the French, the English, the Native Americans were there. Then you had the Chinese come, during the time of the railroad being built, and the Mexicans. There's no sense of the other insofar as the other is your neighbor. So Americans have had to live with people of different creeds, colors, etc., from the beginning, just about. And there was a lot more, interesting enough, paradoxically, it was much more integrated in the South. In the antebellum South, cities were a lot more integrated, and the North was a lot more segregated. And when we're talking about race, that's one thing. When we're talking about what you can't see on the outside, which is observance, not just of a particular religion, in our case, the true religion, but just of the simple laws of God, or even what we might say the natural law, that there's a disobedience there. And there's some principles that you need to help us understand so that we can deal with these individual cases, because our listeners are going to have individual cases they could bring to you, Father. But I think our goal today is for you to teach us what the general principles are so we can go discern for ourselves what the best thing is, rather than send Father your 700 emails about your particular cases. Hopefully today we're going to head off maybe 690 of those emails, and maybe, Father, you might send Father 10 of them. And Father, so let's start with the workplace and with various categories of people in the workplace who aren't fellow practicing Catholics. What are some things that we need to keep in mind, and which categories of people are we talking about?
All right. Well, first off is that in general, we're going to, like you said, Stephen, especially here in America, we're going to work with every walk of life that you can think of, really. There's going to be people from all over the place, especially if you're for a big company, and you have to be able to maintain a working relationship there for the good of the purpose of being there, which is to work, to do a job for a company, and move on with that. And then there's the the personal aspect of it. And the biggest sticky points that we run into, which I think that we're going to really deal with here, is those who are homosexuals, those who are living in sin, and those who are divorced and remarried. Those are the biggest, I guess, or most common ones where Catholics are raising their eyebrows, saying, "Okay, now what do I do? How do I deal with said person who's living a lifestyle that is really contrary to everything that I know to be true? That is against, like you were talking about, going against what's part of the natural law." And I think with those general categories, there's general principles to understand. First off, that our own actions in the workplace, especially towards everybody, really, has to be one of consistency in general demeanor. When we see something that is to us, creates that, oh boy, that's wrong, and it's one of the hot button topics of society today. We can sometimes fall into this knee-jerk reaction. We can fall into this. How do I do? Do I just shut down? Do I say something? Do I need to correct the person? Whatever it may be. And our first principle should always be that calling back to what is the highest of virtues set down by our Lord, and that is towards charity. That we should always be charitable. So for one, we should always be nice, if you will. That's if there's anything that is unfortunately a stigma of traditional Catholics today, is that they tend to be kind of rude, or they tend to be put off, or they tend to be mean to people, and that can't be our demeanor at the workplace. When we think of the early Christians, and what was a major source of conversion for the pagans was see how these Christians love one another. They see the charity that exuded from these people. We see our Lord ate with sinners and interacted with them all the time, because you're always hoping for conversion, and by showing forth charity where we are to everybody that we're with is extremely important, because that example is what is put forth, and that's what they see, and they always come back to. They realize, well, so and so is a Catholic, but he's a really nice guy, and but what that doesn't include is participating in sin, which we'll get into in a bit. But that being nice, it sounds a little corny, but at the same time, I don't think I can stress it enough that truly charity is the highest of the virtues. The second part that we need to recognize for ourselves is to be a good example in our lives. Just our daily life at work should be an exemplary one. We shouldn't have two different people. We shouldn't have our church person and our prayerful person, and then on the other hand have our work person. We're one person in itself. So if we're Catholics, we should act like Catholics whether we're at work or whether we're at home or whether we're at church or anywhere we go. We should always be one of Catholics as acting as a Catholic, because that example that we have really that we give, I should say, is going to speak more volumes than any words that we could ever say. So if someone knows that we're a Catholic, and then at the same time we're using profanity, or we're consistently, or we're talking about inappropriate things and whatnot, then they're not going to take us seriously. They never will. It has to be one of my actions speak much more loudly than my words. So those two, we should always have those two general principles first and foremost in dealing with different people at work, because that's something that we can always control and always set forth is to be charitable and to be a good example. And in most cases, that's going to cover a large portion of interaction with people at work. We can't change who our coworkers are. We can only do our best to maintain our own Catholic integrity in our lives. So that's the first part of it. Thing is, okay, now we have to actually interact with them. What do we need to do? Well, when we are seeing these people living in various states of sin, the first action towards them should not be one that is seen by them necessarily, but is something that we should do on our own, is prayer for them. And that's, we have to spiritualize our interactions. We have to be praying. If someone is living a lifestyle that causes that gut feeling and that knee-jerk reaction of that's wrong and I don't know what to be doing, our first course should be, when we're with ourselves, that it should be prayer for them. Remember, a lot of these people probably don't have anyone at all praying for them, and you might be the only one. And we're not going to change anybody without the assistance of God. Nobody's going to convert without grace. And our source for grace for people is going to come chiefly from our prayers, from our offerings to God, for their intentions, for their sake. And so,
right. And Our Lady said that so many people go to hell because there is no one to pray for them. I think that's a particularly relevant quote, right?
Exactly. Absolutely. And oftentimes people get themselves into it's the funny thing about Catholics. We always feel like, I think it's because of, especially in the United States, we see this model of the Protestants, standing out on the street corner with sandwich boards around them, with some sort of one-liner about Jesus saves all or something like that, or Jesus is your Lord and Savior, accept him, or whatever. And we think we have to actually be out there standing up on a soapbox doing something. But in reality, those, while well-intentioned, those actions really don't do much. Rarely do you have someone pulling over on the side of the road and seeing the Protestant man with the sandwich board and going, you know what, I never really thought of Jesus being my Lord and Savior, but maybe seeing as you have a sandwich board on, maybe I think I should rethink this. That usually doesn't do anything good. But what does do something good is when we have interactions with people all the time and we're praying for them behind the scenes every day, and then all of a sudden something happens in their lives, and what do they remember? Well, I'm having a tough situation right now in my life, and I have all these people that I can talk to, but the one person that I know I can talk to about a serious matter with is John or Susie, because they always, in their demeanor, they're always kind and charitable. At the same time, I can also tell by the way they act that their beliefs are not just words or things that they do on Sunday, but they're consistently always acting in a way a Catholic does. People notice it. People will just instinctively know that someone that they work with is a good and pious person because of the way we act ourselves. And with those prayers, we never know. God is always trying to open doors for salvation for people, and by our prayers, that might open a door for a serious conversation later on down the line, or it might open the door later on for them to question the lifestyle that they're living, because they've been getting graces, actual graces, offered to them by God due to the fact that we're praying for them. And so that has to always be our first line of defense. That's where we're actually going to do good. That's where we're actually going to, and we always think that we're not doing something by praying. Okay, I've prayed, Father, but I need to do something. No, well, just pray. That is doing something. That's an active work in that way. Most of us aren't going to be called to stand up and start preaching against things. Most of us are simply called to good Catholic lives and to prayer and to charity in that regard, and we'll gain souls for Christ, whether we see them or not. We know by our faith that even if it's not the conversion of the people that we're necessarily around, it might be conversion of people that we never seen before. I like to say, I've said it in sermons before in the past, and I like to say to people that each and every one of us is here, especially during these dark times in the church, the crisis that the church is under. If we have the faith now, the only reason is because someone has prayed and sacrificed for us. Whether we've met them or not we don't know until eternity, but we do know that someone has prayed and sacrificed for souls and that is why we've come to accept those graces from Christ in these times. So, that's an important part to remember as well. And if it does lead to conversation, if at some point someone does talk to us seriously in the workplace, you ask us about things of the faith and ask us why we do, why we are not like the other people we work with sometimes in regards to our language or things like that, and it leads to a serious conversation, then all the better. But we shouldn't go into it expecting to having to stand up and get integrally involved in the secret lives of everybody at work. And if we have the opportunity to talk, then we do, and we should be ready to give information about the faith, and we should be ready to hand out if someone is willing to accept the sacramental, like the green scapula, for instance, or perhaps a rosary or whatever, a medal, whatever it may be. That can also be a source of actual graces towards the conversion of another person. If someone is willing and ready to accept something like that, then great. We should be ready to give those things out. I oftentimes carry green scapulas in my wallet just for the sake that you never know. I could be on an airplane and talking to somebody and have the opportunity to give them a green scapula and then pray for their conversion along with the prayers of the green scapula. So it's always being ready in those situations. But with that, those are.
I was going to say, Father, I think you've given us a good pre-game situation, right? This is what we do, before we have a situation, and then I think you're getting us ready for the situation.
Right, exactly. So now that's how we should always be in action, no matter who it is, and no matter where we're working or who we're running into. But now we have to realize that, okay, that's good, Father, but what about these actual situations? Gay people, homosexuals at work, people that are living in sin, divorced and remarried, etc. Now, say that so-and-so, for instance, now we have situations that come up with it. Well, we have to remember that our other principle is never to participate in the sin itself. It doesn't mean we have to be rude or off-putting. In fact, we should never be so. But we cannot, under no circumstances, participate in it. So it's one thing that if we have, Mike, who's known to be a homosexual, working at our company, and we see him at the coffee pot, and we say, "Hi, Mike. How are you?" "Oh, I'm doing well." "Oh, good. Did you have a good weekend, or did you, is nice weather today, or whatever? Little small talk type of things." Then those are all well and good. But what happens if Mike comes and asks us to lunch, or Mike asks us to go to his house for dinner or something? And there needs to be a differentiation there, that it's one thing to be nice to Mike and to be nice to him in work and everything like that, but when you hear that, oh, Mike is marrying Tim and we're taking up a collection from the workplace to get him a gift for his marriage, quote unquote, to Tim, would you like to make a donation? Then we have to say, no, thank you. I would not care to make a donation to that office gift. And And those are areas where we have to make a stand. We don't have to make a stink, but we do have to make a stand. We don't want to, start crusading through the office place about gay marriage being wrong, and start getting very preachy about it, because then all that people hear is that a lot of the people will end up hearing is bigot. If we have to, that we're a bigot, that's what they'll end up thinking. But if we have to explain it a bit, then we say, I'm a Catholic. I don't believe in homosexual marriage. I don't believe that that's something that is from God or part of the natural law, and so I really would not care to donate to the office pool for his wedding gift. Or if he invites us over to dinner, then we just have to politely decline. Thanks, but no thanks, Mike. I would I like working with you, but I would rather not come over for dinner, or I'm not going to be able to do a dinner or something like that. We can't go to his house and then sit down for a nice quiet dinner with him and his partner, if you will. Same thing, and the same thing really applies to the person living in sin. That okay, John invites us over to his house because his living girlfriend is cooking a big dinner and wants to meet us, who John really likes in his life, at work. And so we have to basically separate that and say, no, it's okay that I work with you, and that's fine, but I'm not here to. I'm not comfortable going to a situation like that. That's not something that I do, and so we have to, at those times, make a stand and say, this is not something I'm willing to do. And once again, it's not that we have to get up there and start denouncing each person that we work with for their lifestyle, because most likely they're not going to listen to us anyways. But we do have to, by our actions, make that stand and say, I can't go. On a different note, though, if Mike or the practicing homosexual invites us to lunch and it's just him, and it's like during the workday, and like, oh, why don't you and I go get a sandwich? Then there's no harm in that. There's no harm in the fact that we're going out with said coworker for a sandwich during lunchtime. That's not participating in his sin. Going to his house with him and his partner would be. Is that a clear distinction in that regard?
Yes, Father. And the way that you're framing it, there's a passivity here. So someone might say, well, can I ask him to go to lunch? So, clearly you're talking about the idea of accepting invitations or taking up a collection, and someone's asking you. Clearly, you're not going to go take up a collection for so-and-so's sodomitic marriage, quote unquote. But can I ask that person to go to lunch in the hopes that the conversation may turn to religion, and I'll have an opportunity to chat with them about that? Or is this simply advice you're giving in a passive format?
Well, in regards to like going to lunch, say once again we'll use the practicing homosexual Mike as our example. The idea of going to lunch is, if he asks, we can take him up on the offer. But what we also have to realize is that, what I also don't want to create is, the idea that every Catholic is going to start searching out homosexual people in their workplace to ask to lunch for, and then kind of browbeating them about religion, because that's the flip side of it. So that's why I kind of hesitate towards saying, let's actively go out and try to grab, all the gay people at lunch at work and invite them to lunch. That's because oftentimes finding that proper middle ground for Catholics is something that we all need to be striving for, but we don't always hit the nail directly on the head with that. And if we're looking for the situation to go out and in hopes of creating some sort of religious conversation, then I would say, generally speaking, to try to be more passive about it, to be just kind of to mind your own business in that regard, because more often than not, if someone's living in that lifestyle, they might want to have a conversation based in, like this is a good theoretical conversation or something, but in reality, it's going to take a major stirring of grace to actually get them to change their lives. That's a whole different question. And if we're just doing it so we can tout our Catholic horn, then we're not succeeding in anything. We're just more acting out of pride or out of desire to say something against so and so's lifestyle, based under the pretend category of well, maybe I'll open up a conversation that will be fruitful or something like that. It's more often than not, we're just going to invite ourselves into more crisis in the workplace, if you will, by doing so. And that's not what we should do. In fact, really, a good principle to have for ourselves really is that work is work. We go there to do a job in order to provide for ourselves, to provide for our family. We don't have to feel like these people all have to be our best friends. And we shouldn't necessarily feel that way. These people all have to be our best friends, or these people all have to be traditional Catholics, or they all have to think exactly the way I do. The reality of the situation is most will not think our way. If any will even think the way we do, these people are people that I work with. And it's fine to be nice with them. Perhaps on occasion I might get somebody that I end up being more friendly with than others, or whatever it is. But for the most part, they're coworkers. And modern society today seems that everybody at work is going to be my best friend. And so, but no, I don't have to be so integrally involved with everybody at work's life. They're just people I work with. They just happen to be in the same employment that I am in, and I have to get along with them at work, and that's fine, but I shouldn't feel obligated to go seeking out to be on everybody's Facebook page, or to be the one that everybody at the office really enjoys all the time, coming to, I don't have to go to their kids' softball games and whatever it may be. It's they're just people I work with, and that's it. And if something develops into more of a friendship, then that's fine. But at the same time, that notion of, I got to be best friends with everybody, and I got to try to go out there and try to convert my entire office, is usually more based in our own pride than anything else. So, does that make sense?
Well, and I think too, yes, no, and also, Father, again, that just goes back. We have listeners from all over the world, but a large number of our listeners come from the United States, and I just think this is symptomatic to America, is that we want to get along with people. We want to make friends at work because we want to feel normal. We want to feel like we can talk about regular things with people. We so desperate. We're so marginalized for our beliefs. You could say broadly in society, we cling to, Joe from the office. He's really conservative. He's a Republican, but he agrees with some of the things I agree with, and you try to build bridges on this sandy ground because you have some beliefs in common. When Christ isn't your common denominator, and specifically Christ, taking our Lord at his word, not our interpretation of Scripture. And I also appreciate that you're talking about there being a unifying look at these things. So we're not just singling out homosexuals, people living in sin, people who are divorced, or people maybe not living in sin but practicing that kind of lifestyle of fornication. There should be a guide there that these are not necessarily people who are going to be your best friends, or they shouldn't be people you court as friends or try to cultivate as friends, because there's some fundamental problems that you have to deal with first. And I suppose too, Father, that applies to people who, have come to Catholicism or come to tradition later in their life. So they have these lifelong friends potentially who maybe are in these situations. And now we're going to cross over, I think, to the next part that you want to talk about, which is the far more difficult thing, which is family. You know, you can pick your work, you can pick your friends, but you can't pick your family, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
You can always, if the situation becomes untenable at work, you know, as hard as it may be, you can maybe always find another job. But so the middle ground between work and family is friends, because you can also pick your friends. You know, let's say you've come to tradition after years being out in the world, and you have some homosexual friends, and you have some people who live in sin in your life, and you have people who are divorced, and maybe you have a really close couple in your life, but, you know, one of them had, you know, an early, you know, mistake, quote unquote, mistake marriage, and this is her second marriage or his second marriage, and you've been friends with them, and now you come to the point in your life, or that you're listening to this broadcast, and, you know, Father is now going to tell you, you know, how do I transition into a Christian life? What do you do, Father? Is it, you know, do you sit down and say, you know, I've got to have an intervention with all these people in my life? You know, how do you, once you're in it? So I think you gave a lot of good advice for someone who's already Catholic, who's going into a situation with open eyes. But let's say someone wakes up from a dream, you could say, and now they're in it. They're in the midst of this. Family and friends. What are some things that we have to think about?
Yeah. Well, first off, I just wanted to comment real briefly on that idea of, you know, yes, on the one hand, we don't have to be friends with everybody at our office. However, if we do find, I don't want people to take away also that, okay, well, you know, I listen to the show and I can't be friends with people who aren't traditional Catholics. You know, that's not what I want you to take away from it either. You know, you just because you may be a traditional Catholic and someone else may not be a traditional Catholic, but you guys get along really well or something, doesn't mean you can't be friendly with them, and doesn't mean that, you know, you can't, you know, be involved in their lives, especially, you know, if it's something that, like you spoke, like the conservative, you know, gentleman at work or whatever it is that, you know, a lot of people that you run into at work that might not see eye to eye with you on Catholicism are more or less going to be harmless in regards to having friends, and you can still be friendly with them. You can still, you know, have dinner with them or something like that, whatever it may be. But we're talking more specifically towards, first off, I think the idea is that don't feel that you have to be friends with everybody at work. And secondly, that, you know, there's a difference between being friends with someone at work and then also, you know, participating in something that is sinful in their lives. You know, we have to have that distinction there. We don't want to just start casting off all old friends or, you know, start shunning people at work. Once again, it's just, you know, it's okay to have friends that are not necessarily Catholics, but it's if you're living a very, you know, very Catholic life, you're going to find that those friends who are not Catholic that still want to stay your friends that aren't necessarily going to be the same number of people as you started off with, and that's okay. You know, if someone doesn't, you know, starts to grow away from you as a friend because you didn't go to, you know, if Mike takes offense because you didn't go to his quote unquote, you know, marriage to Tim, and doesn't really talk to you all that much at the office anymore, well, that's okay. You know, we need to be willing to accept that and still be nice to Mike, but at the same time, realize, you know that we didn't have any participation in the sinful activity that he was part of. Now, you know, when it comes to, you know, close friends that we already have or family that we have and whatever that may be, you know, a lot of the principles from the people we work with carry over to that same thing. You know, family is family. You can't, you know, they're never not going to be your family because they're related to you. It's just part of, you know, part of what a family is. And like you said, Stephen, you can't choose them, but you do have to sometimes be around them. And for a lot of us, you know, myself included, that means that there's going to be a lot of family that you have that aren't good traditional Catholics, participating in our lives. And that's, it is what it is. Not rare is the person that everybody that's related to them is 100% on board with what they're doing. And so, we still, once again, those essential points from before still apply. We still have to be, just because they're our family doesn't excuse us from charity. So we still have to be nice. Even though they're family and we feel like we can be a little meaner to family, we shouldn't feel that way. We still have to be nice to them. We still have to, in family settings, we still have to live our lives in an exemplary way. We still have to pray for them. We still have to be willing to give out sacramentals to them and things like that. It's just that we can't we can't change jobs, and then we can change jobs and forget about the people that we've worked with before if we were not close friends with them. But I can't change families necessarily. They're always part of my family, and we have to realize that. And with that, with the family setting, we also have to realize that there's going to be times of or more opportunity in that regard for interaction. It's one thing if you're at an office and you kind of say, well, I don't want to get necessarily delve deep into everybody's personal lives and everything like that, and so I just kind of keep to myself and do my job and then go home. Well, that works more in an office situation. You might not know someone is divorced and remarried in an office situation, and that's okay. You don't need to know everybody's marital status that you're working with. In fact, it's better off to not dig into those things. But if it's a family situation, well, then you tend to be more akin to the situation as it is, and you still might run into the homosexual in your family, or the people living in sin, or divorced and remarried people, or whatever it may be. And there's, you're going to have to interact with them at times. Now but once again, it's going to be, what can you do? How can we interact? The biggest question oftentimes that comes up with that is, my so-and-so, my cousin or brother or sister or, aunt or whatever it is, say, a homosexual, and she lives in, Kansas somewhere, and she's coming to visit my city. It wants to know if she can come over, meet up with me come over to my house for dinner or something like that. Can I have her at my house? Well, then we have to make a distinction. Is she traveling alone, or is she traveling with her so-called partner? If it's with her partner, then no, I'm sorry, you can't come to my house for dinner. If she's traveling alone, then there's certainly a lot more allowance for that to happen, because it's not a participation. You're not recognizing their illicit union in that way. You're just simply, this is my aunt, and and she's by herself. She just happens to be in town, and she's stopping by for dinner. That's two different situations there. Same, and then the other flip side of that is, well, what happens if we're all invited to, there's like a big family party, and Aunt Jenny is going to bring, her partner, Susie. What do I do then? It's a family reunion. Do I just skip the family reunion, or do I, because they're both going to be there, or do I go? Well, when it's a large group setting, like a family reunion or a family Christmas party or something like that, then you're not participating in their union. You're essentially just going to the family party, and these people happen to be there. That's a totally different situation than, okay, we're rather than, this is, me and my wife are going to meet up with, Aunt Susie and her partner. That's, two different settings and two different actions to be taken in that regard. One is participating in their sin and one is not. The family party is acceptable. The intimate dinner with the so-and-so and their illicit partner is not an acceptable situation. And so we have to make that distinction with it. Same thing with people living in sin. If my cousin has a living girlfriend and they invite me over to their house, then I have to say no. But if they both show up to the Thanksgiving dinner at my grandmother's house or something, then I shouldn't stay away from Thanksgiving dinner. I still have to be part of the family, do my best to do those things. Now this is if of course this is under the auspice of a family is functioning basically like a normal family, if you will, and sometimes they have the people not living their lives the way they're supposed to be. It's each person has to make their decision on how involved they are with their family. In regards to, if some people I know end up being very much persecuted for their faith in their own family and tend to take a less involved stance with their family because they're more persecuted. And that's their own decision. It has to be made with always leaving a door open for family to come back and to maybe talk to us because they know that who we are and what we stand for and believe in. But sometimes, if it's, especially when kids are involved, if it's going to be something that is like, a major catastrophe that could, really hurt the faith of our children or something like that, then sometimes we take a step back and say, well, for the kids' sake, maybe we stay away a little bit because this is just going to turn into a disaster, or someone is really a bear to be with. But when you're showing up, generally speaking, when you're showing up to a family party, you control the time when you show up, and generally speaking, you can control the time that you leave as well, and exposure to people who might not be living correct lifestyle or might use bad language or or whatever it may be is generally sort of minimal in that regard. Okay, we went to grandma's house, we did the Christmas thing, and Tommy and his living girlfriend were there, but we saw them for a couple hours and then we left and we did kind of our niceties and that was that. And for the most part the kids wouldn't be affected by something like that, but it's a matter of really trying to find that balance. If there's at the same token, you might not want even if your aunt was coming to town by herself, we'll go back to the practicing homosexual relationship aunt there. And say she was coming to town and she was by herself, but that she's really like a loud and proud person, and she's going to try to really talk to the kids about this is my partner Jenny, and she's so sweet, and we can love each other too. And she's, despite the fact that you tell her that you don't want her talking about these things, she's still going to do it anyways. Then maybe you don't want to invite her over for dinner, even in that circumstance. So it has to be kind of all weighed out, and all these situations are very much subjective. That's the big thing. Is it has to be made with prudence. It has to be made with charity as its first principle, but at the same time, also realizing. Once again, I'm not participating in their sin, and I'm not going to do anything that's going to be a very dangerous situation for my own dependents, my children especially. If it's going to be a real threatening situation. So, and with like anything, and we'll probably say it several times today. Anytime you have questions, if you have a question like, should I or should I not go? Or this is my situation and it's kind of confusing, or I think it's kind of borderline, or whatever it may be, don't hesitate to ask your priest. Don't hesitate to call upon him. It's, first off, it's his job to help you see see your way through these type of situations. And secondly, and that's what he's trained for, as well. He's trained for making good moral decisions. And then secondly is the point that even just from a natural point of view, that he's an outside set of eyes. He doesn't, oftentimes, especially with family, our own feelings get mixed up in it, and it clouds our judgment towards something, and sometimes we need that outside objective set of eyes to say, no, this is what I think is going to be best for your situation. This is how you should approach it, and go from there. And so don't hesitate to call upon your priest to ask him, how should I deal with this situation or in my life? Because that's part of our job. That's what we're here for.
For those of you just joining us, you are listening to Pastoralia Episode 4 on the Restoration Radio Network. I'm Stephen Heiner, joined with Father Stephen McKenna, and today we've covered quite a lot already. The first part of our show, our episode today, was doing some cleanup work from Episode 3 about work on Sunday and reserved sins and confession. Father's then gone on to give us some general principles about how to be and treat with people in the workplace, letting your actions speak louder than your words, to prepare the ground for anyone of goodwill to actually engage with you. And then we transitioned over to some discussion about family. And obviously we've got a lot more to cover there, Father, but I wanted to pause for a minute and go back to a clerical conversation show that I did with Father Chikata and Bishop Sanborn last season, in which I inadvertently used the word gender. And Father Chikata let that go for about 30 seconds before he said, now, Stephen, you got to be careful about using a word like gender. And then he gave some really important advice about, the changing of words and what that means. And I was thinking about the fact, as you were talking about people in the workplace and knowing, who was divorced. And I thought to myself, I'm one of these people that's completely clueless. They make this reference to gaydar. Do you have a good sense of gaydar? And I'm clueless. Someone, I could hire somebody to be an employee for me and work with them for 8 months. In fact, I can think of one case specifically. They worked for me for a year before I found out inadvertently through a personal conversation we were having with each other, and I found out at that point that person was a practicing homosexual. But I had no idea. I think partly because it's not relevant to my working, as you say, if I'm just working with them and we don't have a friendship outside of work, but we're friendly enough to have a personal conversation, then it doesn't occur to you. Now, that being said, I just used the word gaydar, and I wanted to reflect with you about that use of the word gay versus, let's say, the use of the word homosexual, or what sounds very harsh to modern ears, sodomitic. And I wanted to get your take on that, Father. What should be our position? Is that, are we adopting the words of the revolution if we use something like gay? And of course, this changes in different languages. They don't use that same word in French, but and in some languages they don't even have a word for it. But how should we discuss this?
Well, the proper, I guess, for the English language, the proper technical term would be homosexual. That would be, that's what has been the more PC term, I guess, if you will. And I'm not necessarily, and I'm sort of, Father Chikata would agree that, we don't tend to really concern ourselves overly about being politically correct all the time. And, what's adopted by the world as politically correct is not always necessarily the terminology we're going to use, and it's also not always the correct term, to be used. But at the same time, I guess that is the more politically correct term, and for us to use that is something that is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that term. Gay, it is a changing of a colloquial term that, I mean, in reality, the meaning of the word is happy. And, you know, if you read older books, you know, I was just listening to, well, I was just came back from the missions, and I do a lot of driving for that, and so I listened to audiobooks. And one of the books I was listening to was a bunch of the short stories of Father Brown by G.K. Chesterton. And there's oftentimes he uses that term gay, but he's talking about someone just being of a happy disposition, you know, and now that word is taking on a whole new context in life, you know, that for someone to say, oh, someone was gay, we don't think the same thing anymore as we did 60 years ago in regards to that term. And it's and so we have to be cognizant of that, and we have to recognize that. But as for, you know, like fear and trembling over using gay rather than homosexual, I don't feel that you know, I have to necessarily worry about just because someone who's extremely politically correct is going to say, well, you know, that's not really the proper term for these people. Well, you know, it's also not something that is overtly offensive. Now, when you talk about something like sodomitic, that's more of a calling a spade type of term, I guess. You know, and when you break it down to brass tacks, that's what that type of relationship, I guess, in that regard would be, because it's following along the sins of Sodom. But at the same time, we also have to recognize who we're talking with, because on the flip side of it, we don't want to do something that is, we know that people who are actually homosexual would more than likely take offense to a term sodomitic in a way of, you know, completely just shutting off us as listening to anything that we have to say, and would look at us through eyes that would just basically, while they're ignoring what good points we're making, they'd say, well, we're just bigoted type of people. No, we, you know, like St. Paul says, we want to be all things to all men to save all. And so if using one word rather than another is going to be the difference between us being approachable or us being just purely hated, then there's, you know, then I would say in that sense we shouldn't go out of our way to use, you know, a term that, while truly honest, is not going to bear very much fruit in that regard. You know, now if it was like-minded people talking about it and we happen to use that term, then, you know, no harm in that. But we also have to be somewhat careful in not trying to give any credence to they're going to attack us anyways just because we take a stand against that lifestyle. They're going to assume that we're, you know, bigoted people oftentimes anyways. But we don't want any credence. We don't want to give them any credence to it, because we want them to separate the true argument, the reason why we don't go along with it, from any kind of feelings that we may have towards that. You know, we don't want to give them any more leg to stand on to not listen to us or to not reflect upon it than they already have. So for me, I would caution people against using harsher words, especially depending on your audience, if you will, I guess. You know, for, like I said, if it was just like-minded people purely talking and someone had said sodomitic relationship, you know, I'm certainly not going to take offense to it. It is what it is. But, you know, if I was at work and I started talking about it in that way, you know, that could be very off-putting and basically turns anything that we have, anything intelligent that we have to say on the topic into just kind of noise, because they've already shut us off due to the fact that we used a certain term rather than another one. So that's the sense that I think on that, is that we should reflect back to that first point of be nice. You know, I mean, we got to be nice, and if that means choosing one term over another just for the sake of not sounding hateful in our speech, then we, and we're able to do that, then we should be able to.
Now, Father, I want to pause for a moment and get to a couple questions that we had from Facebook, which are not areas we've talked about today. One is on single mothers, and the other is on non-practicing homosexuals. Now, obviously, if someone's a non-practicing homosexual, we may not know it, because it's the opposite of being loud and proud, I suppose, right? It's something that you would keep to yourself. You wouldn't tell a bunch of people about it. So I suppose this question is informative for someone who is in this situation. And the question from Facebook was, what is the church's teaching based on Scripture of a homosexual who is not sexually active? How does a homosexual live a meaningful life whilst at the same time having to exclude themselves from taking part in sports, etc., because of sexual temptations? It is well known what the church says on sodomy, fornication, etc. Very little is said on homosexuality in its purely non-sexual, non-externally activated context. Not our easiest question today, Father.
No, but the answer to it is relatively simple. It's someone who has the disorder of a same-sex attraction, if you will, and I think and I think that's a good distinction to make. Is that if someone has attraction to someone of the same sex as themselves, they're in no way evil in themselves. It's a disorder. It's it's a disorder of thought and disorder of desire, and it's to be treated like any other temptation, really. If I'm not married but was a straight person and I was tempted to fall into sins against the 6th and 9th commandment, I have to reject them just like someone who has homosexual tendencies and has temptations towards that. They have to reject those temptations the same way. And if there's and for those people who, and I know that they are out there, I know that they exist, and who have that heavy cross to bear, and if they actually bear it manfully, and by manfully I mean courageously, then they're they really actually are doing a heroic action, and they're not, it's not going to be known to most people, because that's not something that needs to really be talked about, really, unless it's someone who's trying to give courage to other people who have the same disorder and is telling them, like, listen, I'm doing this and you can do it too, type of thing. Otherwise, generally speaking, it's not known, except for perhaps maybe it in your family or a really close friend or something like that, and that's a different situation. But for the most part, the person you work with who's got the rainbow banner over their desk, that's not going to be the one that's not a non-practicing homosexual. But it's for those people who bear it manfully, it's just like any nobody has an impossible situation to save their soul. So if they have this disorder this is whom they're attracted to, then they have to protect themselves, as the person who wrote the question points out. Avoiding perhaps participating in certain sports because of the locker room or whatever it is as being a temptation. Well, yeah, that's part of turning away from temptation. In the same way, and if they're doing so, then it's then they're just as much a Catholic as anybody else would be. There's no distinction there. They're just simply rejecting a temptation that comes to them like any other myriad of temptations, and perhaps theirs is a bigger one. From the Scriptures, I think the most pertinent one would be of our Lord talking about everybody has to pick up their cross, carry it, and follow Him. And so everybody's going to have their cross to bear. Everybody's going to have temptations that are most pertinent to to them, to their own, as the old saying goes, Stephen, I've never met a temptation that I didn't like. And so, we're tempted by it because we're attracted to something, but we know it's to be illicit, and we reject the temptation. And so if someone is attracted to someone else of the same sex and they reject that temptation, then it's the same mode of gaining virtues as rejecting any other temptation, and that's fantastic. If we know someone in our lives that is non-practicing homosexual, then we should be careful to not open up a door for temptation to them, but at the same time we should treat them just like any other person, really. I mean, I don't know any reason why we shouldn't. We should feel free to be friends with them and to do anything that is appropriate with them. Whether it be dinners or playing something like golf or something. I don't know. Whatever you guys have as a common interest, and that should be fine.
The second question there, Father, which is a segue into a sacramental issue, is the question reads, how do Catholics treat a child who is born outside marriage and their parents? I suppose they mean the parents of that child. Are Catholics allowed to acknowledge the birth, congratulate the parents, etc.? And how does this apply to family and non-family situations? And I suppose the implication there is it like everything else? When the child is born, is the baptism celebrated with the same regular solemnity? What happens, to a single mother who wants to, get married later, or she finds someone to get married to, does the church celebrate a marriage in the regular solemnity? So I suppose there's some sacramental questions tied up with this, but I suppose we want to go back to our original question of what's our position? How do we treat single mothers that are part of our parish life, potentially? Obviously, I think all the distinctions you already made in the workplace apply, so we don't need to revisit that. So this would probably be something a little closer to home for some traditional Catholics.
Well, I think any chapel that you go to, you're going to have people that are single parents, or they're going to be people who may have had children out of wedlock, or whatever it may be. And, it's just one of those things. It happens to traditional Catholics just like it does to people in normal society, hopefully in a lower percentage. But it happens. And if it's someone that's truly a single mother, or whatever it may be, then perhaps there's a situation where and by single mother I mean they had a child out of wedlock and now they're on their own. They're no longer in that sinful relationship, but they're just truly on their own trying to raise their child. Then perhaps there's ways that we can help. That person in that situation or whatever it may be. We certainly shouldn't treat their children any differently because it's not their fault that the situation that they were born into, and so they should be treated like any of the other kids in the parish, and whatever it may be from there. Now, if we're talking about someone who's living in a situation that is sinful or still part of a situation that's sinful, we shouldn't be saying, hey, congratulations on your baby, John and Julia, or Susie and, Timmy or whatever, because congratulations on your baby because it was, you had a child born out of wedlock. It's not something to be congratulated. It's not something to be lauded as a situation. But if it's something that is, so it's just kind of, you can ask if the baby is healthy or, how's the baby doing? Is the baby healthy? And oftentimes we can get away with not sounding rude while still not congratulating on that by just asking purely about the child, like, oh, all 10 fingers and 10 toes, and oh, yes, okay, oh, great, wonderful, that's good to hear that that everything went well and stuff like that, but it's not hey, congratulations, because you can't congratulate someone on a situation that is in and of itself a bad situation. Now, them in the parish, we shouldn't necessarily ostracize them, or we shouldn't ostracize them in the parish either, because part of the reason, especially if they're having their child baptized, or and going to make the best of a bad situation and make sure that the child is raised with the faith and realize that they made a mistake, and that's what happens in life. Sometimes people make mistakes. We don't want to shun them and relegate them to a corner or something like that. It needs to be, we need to be positive in the assistance to help them with the Catholic rearing of that child, to make sure that just because they came from an unfortunate situation doesn't mean that they are no less children of God, and that they have a duty to save their souls too, and we should give them all opportunities to be able to do that. So that's where we have to, charity has to reign supreme in that. We don't congratulate a mom on, or a mom and a dad for bringing a child into the world by sin, but we do realize that there's no changing it. The child is coming into this world, and we have to make the best of that situation, and that is that we should that child should be treated just like any other Catholic child in that regard. Now, also, we should also realize too that oftentimes those traditional Catholics shouldn't. You should also realize that there are some areas that just aren't their business as well, and it seems like a lot of times that another area that oftentimes people fall into is that they feel like they're overly involved in someone, or they should be overly involved in someone's life, when it's really none of their business. If it's just someone that you see on Sunday at Mass on occasion, and that of the situation, but it's you're not particularly best friends with them, or they're the godparent in their life, then you shouldn't necessarily feel the need to really meddle in it either, because sometimes it's just none of your business. But that being said, if you are intimately involved, say you're chosen to be the child's godparent, or or whatever it may be, then encouragement should be given to the child, and instruction in the faith should be given to the child, and made sure that's seen, and prayers and everything like that. And if there's a way to encourage the parents to get out of the sinful situation, and either make it right by a proper Catholic marriage, or if it's not a good situation, then to have them to be separate, or whatever it may be, then so be it. Then that's the duty of those who are their family, or maybe the godparents of their children, and most especially to the priest. That's the way we should deal with that. So.
And just to clarify, Father, as you say, there's not a punishment for the child. Are the celebrations of the church any more muted if there is a sinful situation that you could say gives birth to the problem? So if it's a child of a single mother, is it a regular baptism? And if you're the godparent, is it a regular baptismal ceremony? If someone is a single mother and they're getting married to the father after, is it a regular nuptial mass? Does the church change any of her ceremonials if the circumstances are unusual?
Well, for the baptism, for sure, it's just going to be. So baptism is just going to be a baptism. Plain and simple. There's no real difference of ceremony in a baptism. Once again, it's not the child's fault, and baptism is focused around the removal of original sin from the soul of the child, and them becoming a child of God, and them in the church. And so therefore that's the only thing that might change to that ceremony. It might be, usually a priest would give a little small admonition to the godparents to about their duties as godparents, and if it's a situation where it's an out of wedlock situation, that admonition might be slightly more emphatic because of the fact that they have to realize that their job as godparents might be a little more weighty because of the situation that they were born into. As in regards to the wedding of people who have a baby before they were to get married, that's something that's more subjective. It will depend on whether or not they're both Catholics. It'll depend on the whole situation. Oftentimes, it might be a regular wedding with regular nuptial mass and everything, but it might be a quieter ceremony because of the situation that it is. It might not be this big wedding where all sorts of people from all over the parish come, but that's more of a subjective, case-by-case basis, and oftentimes left up to the discretion of the priest. And so that one's kind of, that one's not as cut and dry as a baptism per se.
Fair enough. I've got one more question, Father, and then if you don't have anything to add, I wanted to move us into the last portion of our episode today. And I have a feeling as I'm going to read, this is a question from Facebook, I have a feeling as I'm reading that this is not an entirely hypothetical situation. People say, well, I have a friend, so this one, right. This question is pretty obvious that this isn't your friend. And the question reads, what does one do if one has a large family with young children and the only one willing to babysit for them is a non-Catholic grandparent who may ignorantly try to encourage the children in sins like lying and immodesty? A little too specific to be my friend. So thank you for whoever wrote that question, Father. How would you deal with that? I guess there's a babysitting question here, and then there's a grandparent question.
Yeah, I think on that one, especially where it's so specific, I don't really want to get too involved into it, because that should be something that person should talk to their priest about. That should be because while it's very specific, not knowing the person or the circumstances or the temperament or leanings of whether they're overly scrupulous or they're or what it may be, I don't want to necessarily comment directly on that question. That person should seek out their priest and ask them, and that priest should be able to give a good answer towards that. Because anytime when we have like a question like that, it's there's a lot more information that goes with the situation than just is on face value of a question like that. So to whoever wrote that in, talk to your priest, ask him, lay out the facts of the situation, and then he can help decide whether it's really something that's truly a danger to their faith, or in which that situation in which you should avoid something like that, or if it's something that is perceived to be possibly a danger to the faith, but in reality it's not all that dangerous and can be allowed or something. So that's my answer. My answer is to not really answer that, just because there's so many possibilities that can come with that, and it should be asked of someone that actually has knowledge of the person and the family situation and the rest of it.
Well, and I think it's great, Father, you pointed out all those different considerations, that a priest has to keep in mind. That today we can lay out some general principles for you, but Father isn't going to be able to answer every particular case. If you don't have a priest that you can rely on, please write to Father, and you can get him at pastoralia@truerestoration.org. It'll be confidential, and Father can respond to you about your particular situation if the general principles that we've been talking about today aren't entirely clear. For those of you who are just joining us, you are listening to Pastoralia Episode 4 on the Restoration Radio Network. Stephen Heiner with Father Stephen McKenna, and today we've been talking about how to live and work with the non-Catholics in our lives. We want to remind you that Pastoralia is a production of the Restoration Radio Network. All rights are reserved, and any duplication without explicit written permission is forbidden. Permission can usually be very easily obtained by writing to mail@truerestoration.org. If you're listening to our show in iTunes or Stitcher, please make sure to leave us ratings and reviews. It helps those looking for truly Catholic programming to more easily find our work. Father, is there anything else you'd like to say on the issue of work or family situations that are challenging before we get into the last part of our episode today?
No, I don't. Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything. I think I covered the basic points. That those basic principles apply, and if people have questions, then really seek the advice of your priest. That's the big thing, is that we can't cover all of the individual questions on a radio program, but we can certainly give some basic principles. So, and for other things, just ask your priest. That's what he's there for.
Our last thing that we're going to talk about today, Father, is the hot button, always hot button issue of weddings and funerals. Not simply the religious aspect for us as traditional Catholics, but even for traditional Catholics, the question of Novus Ordo or Fraternity of St. Peter, Indult, or SSPX. As this, especially there in Cincinnati, Father, you've got everything there, right? You've got the Fraternity of St. Peter, you've got Indult, you've got CRBRI, you've got everybody's there. So there's a lot of people who are going to be friends with people who go to different churches. They still go to the traditional Mass. They may even go to a valid traditional Mass. But what are some general principles we need to keep in mind when we are invited to a wedding or a funeral, and how we obviously, as you say, that there are some individual cases which you may need to talk to your priest about, but what are some general principles we can take to the bank to help us make decisions here?
All right. Well, first off is that if funerals are usually pretty easy. If it's a funeral, you're essentially, and it's a non-Catholic funeral, or it's a Novus Ordo funeral, or even like a Indult or SSPX funeral, and it's someone who is very close to you, then generally speaking, you can attend those things. It's because as long as if it's something like the Novus Ordo or Indult or a non-Catholic ceremony of any kind, then we don't want to be taking any kind of active participation. Maybe just kind of be in the back and pray your rosary or whatever it may be, and say prayers for that person's soul. But it should be so you don't want to be saying the prayers along with them, or singing the Protestant hymns or anything of those in that regard. But just quietly praying for the person's soul. So funerals are usually pretty cut and dry. That being said, you shouldn't feel obligated to go to all these non-Catholic services just because somebody that died and is going to be buried out of such and such, Fifth Street, Christian non-denominational church or whatever it is, and someone you work with is going to be buried out of there. You shouldn't feel obliged to go, and in fact, I would say you probably shouldn't go, because we want to avoid non-Catholic worship whenever we can. And the general principle is that you're not allowed to be at non-Catholic worship. But if it's someone who is close to you, either a good friend or a family member or something, and is buried out of something like that, then you're more there for support to the rest of the family and to offer some prayers for their soul, and you just don't partake in the funeral itself. For everybody else, you can usually pretty much get away with either showing up to the wake beforehand, the viewing of the body, or and offering condolences in that way, or you can get away with writing a nice card or something, or just expressing your sympathies. But for the people who are close to you, then certainly exception can be made for the sake of a funeral. Marriages is where it gets more sticky. It's
and Father, I'm sorry. One last funeral question. Obviously,
yes.
Communicatio and Sacris regarding formal worship, but what about they do a lot of these rosaries at the body, the night before the burial. What should we think about that?
Oh yeah, rosary we should wholeheartedly pray a rosary for somebody, and if it's a group of people praying the rosary for such and such a person, then generally speaking, there's no problem. Just because it's maybe done through a Novus Ordo church, but they're still going to actually offer a rosary for their soul beforehand, then that's then that would be fine. There's no.
I suppose if they choose to say the luminous mysteries, you can just pick a different set of mysteries to do.
I would think so. Yeah, that's stay away from luminous. Hopefully they'll pick one of the three that actually comes from Our Lady, and then and leave the JP2 concoction on its own. But yeah, it's we should always something where it's a rosary and it's offering prayers for their soul. That's generally speaking to be committed. And to be we should not hesitate to pray along with them. Weddings is often sticky, and if there's any time during this show that talk to your priest will apply, no more apparent than in times of weddings would that be there. That's something that really you should really talk with your priest about if you have a situation that comes up my aunt and her boyfriend are getting married, and it happens to be here. Can I go? Talk to your priest, because there's so many possibilities that are there that no two situations really are all that alike. We can apply some general principles, though. That if for instance, if two people are Novus Ordo Catholics and have always been Novus Ordo Catholics, and it's both their first marriage, and they're eligible to be married, and they're very close to you, meaning that they're either relatives or close friends, then you can once again passively participate at it. Don't go being the bridesmaid, or don't go being the seventh maid of honor, or whatever they do now, or of all these Novus Ordo weddings, but to show up, to show your support for something that would be a true marriage, then that's okay, and even extending out to once again, if it's someone who's truly close to you, and they're both Protestants and always have been in their life, then there's nothing wrong in attendance at it, as long as we're not actively partaking in it. We're just passively attending. But when you get into all the sticky stuff of annulments, which essentially, for the most part, there's no way of granting today, then you're really, or if it's something that's immoral, we know divorced and remarried is an immoral marriage. You cannot go to something like that. If it's something where a Catholic is getting married in a Protestant church, or a Catholic is being married by a justice of the peace, then we cannot partake in that. If it's something that's a sodomitic marriage, then absolutely not, obviously. But the more sticky ones, annulments, or but this annulment comes from this group rather than this group, or whatever it is. Talk to your priest about it. Generally speaking, they're all just very sticky situations, and it's going to be, and each one is individual. To get into that really is something that just, it can be taken care of by Father so and so. This is my situation with my brother and his soon-to-be supposed sister-in-law, this is their confounded situation. Can I go? And the priest will know what type of questions to ask in that regard, where to lie on it, and then can make a proper judgment in that. But unfortunately, what happens a lot of times, and what we have to prepare ourselves for, is sometimes we're going to be unpopular with our family, or sometimes we're going to have to be unpopular with our friends, because we may have to say, I'm sorry, but I cannot attend your wedding, because we have to, we can't partake in something that in itself is evil. And so, and when you're dealing with, so-and-so's third marriage, well, I'm sorry, I can't come, because it wouldn't be right. So we have to gear ourselves up that we should be nice about the way we put it, but we at the same time we have to stand up for the faith and for the truth of marriage, before we stand up before we worry about what other people are going to think about us in that regard.
It's interesting, Father. At a young age, I think I was around 11 or 12, and we were still in the Novus Ordo. I was in Novus Ordo until I was 17. And there was a situation which has forever defined our relationship with our American in-laws, and that was that one of my cousins, who was beloved, we loved all of our cousins. When we came to America, we lived with them, and she was getting married to a divorced Episcopal man. So Catholic, strike one, he's not Catholic, and it's not going to be a Catholic ceremony. Strike two, he's divorced. So, of course, she's very happy about it, and she, at the time, I don't think we were living in Texas. We were living in California, and she sent my father tickets, or offered to send my father tickets, and my father not only said, no, we're not going to accept the tickets, but we're also not coming to the wedding. Not only that, we can't recognize the marriage as valid. And it was helpful in a couple of ways. Obviously, it was a very painful thing, because it was easy to just write off all of the children as just having to do whatever my father said. So, there wasn't any ill will born towards us. It was all my dad's fault, quote unquote, because we as a 10-year-old, 11, 12, and all my younger sisters, we couldn't decide to get on a plane and, quote unquote, go support my cousin. So they just attributed it to my father, but they didn't realize that we supported, even at a very early age, we supported our father's decision because we had been raised that way. And there was a permanent rift. But what was really helpful and revelatory was that my aunt at the time said to my father, family first, before religion, which was fascinating to me, because I thought, what kind of life is that? Religion just becomes a sports team or a sentiment. That if family comes first, that family is your religion, which is what my mom, there's the scene in A Few Good Men in which, the Marine, says unit, corps, God, country. And God is somewhere further down the line from where the Marine Corps is. The code there is family, God. And, if family is your religion, well, wow, you're living out your religion. But for those of us for whom, the scripture verse, I come not to bring peace but a sword, has real resonance and meaning, that our Lord wasn't joking around, or he wasn't saying, well, just for some of you. But for the rest of you, you won't have to worry about difficult family situations. That was a lesson was visited upon me early in my life, and I've watched as that part of our family, our extended family, has continued to spiral out of control in terms of rejecting the Catholic faith and taking positions against Catholicism. And it came down to the fact that it was not modeled by my aunt, and to this confrontation very, very early on about marriage. It's such a fundamental issue for a lot of people, and it'll define the way that you have that family relationship for the rest of your life.
Oh, for sure. And and that's the thing with a lot of people who have really truly secular mindsets. they have that, family first mentality. And, we're not here to poo-poo on the family, that's for sure. I mean, it's, family is extremely important, but, God always has to come first, because ultimately, one day, I might love my family in this life, but one day I'm going to have to die and eternity begins. And I'm not going to be standing up, for judgment before my parents or my cousins or something for my eternal salvation. I'm going to be standing before our Lord. And so I have to serve him first as the highest of all things. And then, then family is, high up on the list in importance, but it has to come after God, and that's the thing. And people don't always realize that. Even people who seem to be good Catholics sometimes will stand up for good things in principle, but then if it happens in their family, all of a sudden they start to waver, because it's my son, it's my daughter, it's my mother, it's my whatever, and all of a sudden they start to waver in their principles in that application there. Well, no, it's the principle remains. It's just hard to make the decision now because it's your family, your own flesh and blood, but you still have to choose what's right. You still have to do the correct thing. You have to honor God before all else, and sometimes that means making a tough decision. So, no, that is certainly something that you say that story, Stephen, and I think that more than a few of our listeners will certainly have that resonating true in their own lives as well. That at some point there was the choice to be made, and they have to choose, and we have to be ready for that. And if it hasn't happened in your life yet, then you still have to have it in the back of your mind. At some point, perhaps I may have to make that decision. So.
Yes. Is there anything else we should keep in mind on weddings, funerals, or about any of the topics that we've talked about today that we've skipped over, or you wanted to go into a little bit more detail on, or we forgot about before I let you go?
No, I think that'd be basically it. Is that once again, people hopefully have learned some of the catechism in regards to not going to non-Catholic worship, and that includes weddings for the most part. But when things get a little gray or sticky, then once again we have to have the principle that we cannot participate in something that is wrong and sinful in itself. And so we have to avoid those, even if it's difficult in our lives. But at the same time, if it's a gray situation and we don't know whether or not allowance would be made, or that we could participate in, someone's wedding or something like that, then once again, ask your priest. They're the one that have the proper training in moral theology and the science of theology, and can apply the principles correctly to your specific situation, and give you some guidance in the right direction with that. And like you said, if there are people who do not have access to priests to help them with the decision, then they certainly can feel free to write to me, and I can do my best to help them with that as well. If you do have a priest that you know to be a good priest and trust as a good priest, then you should talk to him. He'll know you best, rather than someone else, and he'll be able to help you in your situation, whatever it may be.
As always, Father, thanks so much for your time, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Stephen.
All of us here at the Restoration Radio Network would ask that if you found this show to be informative, helpful, or in any way beneficial to you and to your faith, that you please consider making whatever donation is possible to our apostolate, no matter how small it may be. To those of you who have donated, a heartfelt thank you for your kindness and generosity. Remember that above and beyond material contributions, the most important donation you can make to our work here is prayer. Please think of offering a Mass, a Rosary, or simply even an Ave for our work the next time you pray. If you have any questions or comments, or would like to reproduce our copyrighted work on your channel in some format, we'd love to hear from you. Again, mail@truerestoration.org. For The Restoration, I am Stephen Heiner. May God bless you.
This program was brought to you free of charge by the sponsorship of Novus Ordo Watch. See for yourself that the Church of the Second Vatican Council is not in fact the Catholic Church of the ages. Go to novusordowatch.org.